I'm United States Senator Joe Manchin. I want to thank you all for joining us today to learn about the process to apply for and receive congressionally directed spending requests. As your United States Senator, I strive to carry on the legacy of the great Robert C. Byrd, who, as the Senate Appropriations Committee Chairman, secured funding for projects all across the Mountain State during his time in the Senate. I think most of you know, and there's probably projects in your area which shows that.
Yes, they can.
This year,
So they can.
So this year, the Senate Appropriations Committee.
It's saying my speaker's not working. I tested it earlier.
Marcus, can you control some of that?
Yeah. Can everyone please make sure you're on mute? Thank you.
This year, the Senate Appropriations Committee will once again allow communities and nonprofits to request targeted funding for projects that benefit West Virginians and Americans while remaining fiscally responsible. Last year, I proudly secured more than $228 million in CDS projects to directly benefit West Virginians and boost economic growth for our communities. Those projects included developing a next-generation aviation education program for Mingo County students, upgrading the Anstead wastewater treatment plant to allow for further growth around the New River Gorge National Park, and improving northern transit, improving the regional transit in Wheeling and the Northern Panhandle. These federal investments spur innovation and boost our economy, and while also supporting the needs of our state. Last week, my staff and I reopened the webpage for submitting CDS requests, which will be open through Sunday, March the 12th. That's Sunday, March the 12th, as far as the request will be received. My staff are here to talk to all of you through the CDS process and help bring investments to our great state. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us with any questions going forward. Let me explain to you this whole process that we're going through. There's a lot of controversy, people saying, well, here's earmarks coming back. And that means it's all basically throwing just pork to get political favors. I want you to know that's the furthest thing from the truth. The bottom line is, I believe that if we work together and you all knowing the need that you have in your area is much more responsive and much more productive to the investments the federal government's willing to make and give back than some bureaucrat sitting in an office somewhere in the country making a decision on what West Virginia should have and should not have. That's the whole purpose. So I'm encouraging all of you, find the most need that you have in your area, find the most need that has a support of your constituents and people all through the area that you're representing. When you do that, we have no problems. If you push something that has favor with very few, but it might be something that you have a pet peeve, that'll come back to haunt you and all of us. So I encourage all of you, find the most needed project you have that's been neglected that we can help you with. That helps all of us, and I can defend that until the cows come home. I can't defend a bridge to nowhere. And that's really what got all of this turned around so long ago. So we're back on track now with very, very much needed programs that people are going to be proud of. I'm proud to put everything that we do on the web so people can review the requests you've made and also what we've been able to secure. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the staff. I just want to thank all of you for what you do continually, how you basically reach out to your communities, how you're in touch with your communities, making sure you're meeting the most critical needs they have. So again, thank you. God bless all of you. You'll have Seth, who runs the Appropriations Committee, all of our people here that can help you. I'll see you soon, hopefully. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. My name is Seth Gaynor, and I am the Senator's Senior Policy Advisor overseeing his work on the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. Thank you all for your interest in congressionally directed spending for fiscal year 2024. I'll just kind of go through a brief overview of the process, our application, some of the changes, and then I'll open it up for questions. So the Senate Appropriations Committee helps write legislation to allocate federal funds to government agencies, departments, and organizations on an annual basis. As a member of the Senate committee, Senator Manchin works hard to ensure that taxpayer dollars benefit West Virginia while remaining fiscally responsible. Driving investment in West Virginia has always been a top priority for Senator Manchin, and these federal investments spur innovation, boost our economy, and support the needs of the state. So for many years, this was through what we call programmatic requests, which are general funding requests for certain agencies, accounts, and programs that are important to West Virginia. That ranges from funding support for the Appalachian Regional Commission, or the Office of Fossil Energy and the Department of Energy, or the Green Bank Observatory, or the NASA IVNV facility in Fairmont, to programs like the Assistance to Coal Communities Program or the Abandoned Mineland Fund. This year, the Senate Appropriations Committee will once again allow state and local governments, nonprofits, and public entities to request targeted funds through what we call congressionally directed spending, although you all know that more commonly as earmarks. The difference between these type of requests and what we were able to request before is that congressionally directed spending can direct funding within these programs to a specific project or location. So last year, Senator Manchin was proud to have secured over $228 million for 175 earmarks for the state of West Virginia. These ranged from awards as small as $8,000 for parking at the Lewis County Senior Citizen Center to millions of dollars for the National Guard and the WVU Children's Hospital. These projects helped our state's airports, water treatment facilities, they built trails and roads, and helped construct new hospitals and keep others open that were struggling. That makes for a total of nearly $395 million in funding for 263 projects in the 2 years since we reinstated earmarks. So the senator and our office worked hard last year to advocate for your requests, and we are excited to do so again this year. So as we start the 2024 appropriation cycle, I just wanted to highlight some things that are staying the same as last year, as well as some things that might have changed. So some of the key requirements remain the same as last year. We can't provide funding for for-profit institutions. We cannot provide funding for any organizations that include direct relatives for the senators, for any member of Congress, including Senator Manchin. Not all subcommittees are participating, so that doesn't include the defense, legislative branch, and state and foreign operations. Only certain eligible accounts are available within each subcommittee. We've put together, by the way, a pretty extensive guidebook that goes through each eligible account and some of their different requirements. For example, you must meet local match requirements if they're required by the state or policy, and each account will be different. So once again, we'll be required to post all of our congressionally directed spending requests online. Projects will be evaluated based on their merit and their impact on the community, and will continue to place emphasis on areas that struggle to receive federal funding or have not received earmarks in the past. We'll still be requiring community support, but we'll allow additional forms of documentation to show that support, including support from community development plans, intended use plans, or other documents, resolutions passed by local councils or boards, and in certain instances, like transportation projects, for example, you may be required to receive a letter from the state agency in charge of this process. All of those can be used to demonstrate community support. So some of the changes I'll highlight. This year, every town, county, and nonprofit will have to provide their employer or tax identification number. Many of the accounts require additional questions from last year. This is particularly true for any accounts within the EPA, National Park Service, and other agencies within the Department of Interior. Just make sure that you answer those questions carefully, as they will be used to determine your eligibility for funding. So any projects funded through the Department of Housing and Urban Development must demonstrate that they meet one of the Community Development Block Grant national objectives, and those are outlined in our guide. And then finally, this year, the community is requesting the amount of funding, the total project cost, and the minimum amount of funding needed for the project to move forward. And then actually, one last thing that I'll note is that many applicants didn't necessarily provide a full budget breakdown for their project last year. This is really important, and if you don't provide a detailed budget, your project could be deemed ineligible by the committee. So if you're interested in submitting a congressionally directed spending request, you can find that at www.manchin.senate.gov/appropriations. You just click on the button that says congressionally directed spending, and that'll take you to the landing page for our earmarks form. You'll need to create an account, and then that will send you a confirmation email, and you'll have access to the form itself. It's important to remember that, filling out that form, you can actually save your work and come back to it, so you don't need to do it all at once. So some things that I'll actually talk about the application itself in the form. So you'll need to provide personal information on you and the organization, whether that's a nonprofit or local government. We're asking folks this year to use an easily identifiable project name and succinct project description. So we recommend using a format of recipient, project name, and that will be listed on our submission form to the Appropriations Committee. So an example of that would be City of Charleston downtown street repairs. One thing that's new on the form from last year is that you'll also be asked to provide a short description of the project. This is distinct from the larger justification that you'll be asked to provide. It's basically just used to describe the project when we publish those requests on the website. So you'll need to be specific about what you're requesting. There's a match requirement for many accounts. The match or lack thereof varies from account to account. So please make sure that you are aware of that match and can provide proof that you can meet that to the committee. Many of the projects will also need to go through the NEPA environmental review process. The best way to describe this is just think of this like applying for any kind of grant, but instead of submitting it to USDA or ARC or another federal or state agency, you're submitting it to us. That means that we're going to need some pretty detailed information on the projects you'd like to fund. You need to provide that description, the budget breakdown, the specific impact on the state, a timeline when the project will be improved, and whether any permitting or any other approvals are needed to complete the project. And then the capacity of your organization, whether it's a community or nonprofit, to complete the project, and some examples of past federal funding. Finally, for some of these projects, additional documentation or questions will need to be answered. For example, for emergency operations centers, you'll need to provide a letter of support from the West Virginia Department of Homeland Security Division of Emergency Management. For water and wastewater projects through EPA, projects will need to demonstrate that they are already in the state's Clean Water or Drinking Water State Revolving Fund intended use plan, or are eligible under the SRF State Revolving Fund program guidelines. And finally, similar to last year, highway projects that are not currently in the state transportation plan can be eligible if you can get a letter from the state confirming that it's eligible, and the state is willing to carry out the program and add it to the STIP or TIP if funding is enacted. So those are just a few examples, but when you're filling out the form, take care to answer each question fully. Your application could be deemed ineligible if you fail to do so. And then just a few things that I'll note: that the total amount of money for earmark requests continues to be capped at 1% of discretionary funding this year. That's going to result in a very competitive process. We received 535 earmark requests last year. We received roughly the same the year before. We try to fund as many, we try to, put forth as many projects as we can, and try to advocate for as much funding through the Appropriations Committee as we possibly can. But unfortunately, that doesn't mean that every single project gets funded. And so submitting a request does not guarantee that you'll get funding. It doesn't guarantee support in future years, but we strongly recommend that anybody that submitted one last year does so again, and we'll give that extra consideration. So we've received a lot of questions about eligibility for individual projects. So just wanted to answer that question directly before we get into the broader question and answer period. So last year, like I said, the office received 535 completed requests. We're going to try to answer as many questions as we can, but given that volume of interest, we can't possibly reply to every single person that calls or emails. So at the end of the day, the onus is really on you to determine how to make the best case for your project with the account that you choose. So to help with that, we've provided a guidance document. We call it the spending guidebook, to give examples of eligible projects, the requirements in most of the eligible accounts. I'd strongly recommend before you reach out to take a look at that guidebook and see if any of the questions are answered there. Also recommend you reach out to the relevant federal agency or state office, just like last year. to discuss your project in more detail and determine eligibility. And just like last year, the committee will be accepting requests through existing federal programs. That means that the program managers in office are a great resource. You can actually go online and find a lot of FAQs from the agencies themselves that really get into a lot of detail on each of these projects and kind of what is available and what is not. So for example, if you're considering USDA funding, I'd strongly recommend that you call the USDA field office in Morgantown and get some feedback to them before you submit your request to us. If you still have questions, we'll try to answer as many as you can. And we're here to help to make sure that your voice is heard and make the case for your project. Finally, our deadline is Sunday, March 12th at midnight. Our requests are due to the committee in just a few weeks after that. So, I understand that's not the longest turnaround time, but that's why we want to be here to answer any questions and just try to get you any information that you need before you submit that request. So I think that's it. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has on the call. And yeah, just open it up to some question and answer.
Okay, Seth, I just saw a question come in from Christy Berner, who asks, how detailed does the budget need to be, just by using the main categories or more specific details?
I try to get as detailed as possible. You're more than welcome to provide additional documentation. So if you need to attach kind of a really detailed budget breakdown and then provide kind of the top lines in the form itself, that's fine. Like I said, it's helpful to kind of have as much detail as possible because we do really go back and forth with the committee a lot on these questions. And they ask some pretty detailed questions. So anything that you're able to give us really gives that ammunition when we're interacting with the committee.
Can I ask about question number 4? Ask for impact on the community, and the answer is restricted to 100 characters. That happened last year, and we were told that that was a mistake. Will that be fixed, or can we put an additional attachment?
That is a great question, Sarah. I thought I had fixed all those. So let me, I'll have to go into the website and see if I can make those changes now once the form is public. If not, yeah, you can provide additional documentation if needed.
Okay, Seth, we have another question in via chat. What is the entire CDS timeline? Apps due March 12th. When are funding announcements made and when is funding available?
So unfortunately, I don't have a great answer to that because Congress doesn't really follow a specific guideline. I can give you kind of an overview of what the appropriations process looks like, but it changes every year and it's really subject to negotiation between Democrats and Republicans. And so each year, the appropriations process starts around this time, kind of March or April. And we open up our portal, get requests from constituents, and then we then turn around and there are 12 subcommittees on the Appropriations Committee, and we provide those requests from constituents to the 12 subcommittees. The committee then reviews those, and then we move to what's called a committee markup. That committee markup typically happens sometime around July or August, and that's a good year. And then we are supposed to pass the full federal budget by September 30th each year. That's the end of the fiscal year. That almost never happens. The amount of times that that's happened really in the past 30 or 40 years can be counted on one hand. So more normally we pass a budget by the end of the calendar year, but given the divided Congress this year, who knows? So it's very possible that that could extend into Q1 or Q2 of next year. But once we pass that federal budget, that's when we announce the final projects that are funded through the process. And then that's when you'll actually get outreach from the individual agencies that oversee the accounts that you requested funding in. And what basically will happen is that you'll need to resubmit an application to that agency. That's not a competitive process. So you're basically submitting a non-competitive grant application to the agency. That process, kind of that back and forth with the agency, takes about 3 to 6 months. So all total, I would say that the funding process, it's not a short timeline. And unfortunately, as much as we would like that to be as quick as possible, we are looking at the 2024 budget. So really, I would look at probably at earliest summer, fall, winter next year before you're actually able to receive the funding and start to move forward on those projects. Now, some of the agencies, I will just note, some of the agencies do allow you to move forward on the project after the budget is passed. But that varies by agency to agency. So you may be able to move on it more quickly and get reimbursed, but you really still have to wait for the budget to pass. And that could not happen until December this year or potentially kind of spring of next year.
All right, thank you for that question. We have another question. Do proposed projects have to address only those identified by the federal agency?
I don't fully understand that question. Could whoever asked that elaborate?
The Department of Education has a bunch of different grant opportunities currently listed, and they identify specifically for historically Black colleges and universities, mainly in the STEM area. But if I have a graduate degree that is, something they haven't thought about, would I or should I even consider submitting?
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe that the requests that are included there are intended as examples. But certainly, like if you think you qualify within the Department of Education program, and it sounds like you do, then you should absolutely apply.
Okay, thank you for that question. Next, as long as salaries are directly related to the project or expansion, are salaries a permissible budget item?
Salaries are generally not a permissible budget item. They can be, in some instances, they can be ancillary, but almost generally, as a rule, salaries are not allowed in the for congressionally directed spending.
Okay, next question. Is there a realistic dollar amount we should strive to stay under in order to be considered?
So we've gotten this question a lot. I think the kind of sweet spot for requests are really kind of around the $500,000 mark, but that really depends on the project and the request. Like I've said, we've funded projects as small as $8,000 and as small as kind of $30,000 and $50,000, and as big as tens of millions of dollars for kind of wastewater treatment plants and things like that. So it can range quite a bit. Obviously, we are constrained by that 1% cap in discretionary spending. So it is sometimes easier to fund some of those small dollar amount projects, but there's not really any specific dollar amount that you should try to strive to be under. What I can say is the one requirement is for HRSA grants cannot be more than 15 million. We don't receive a whole lot of $15 million grant requests, but that is a requirement that the committee has set for HRSA grants.
Okay, thank you for that question. And we do have time for some more. If you have a question, please put those in the Q&A box in Zoom or in the chat box, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. Next question is, I'd like to apply as a CDFI. Currently, we are not a 501c3, but a certified CDFI. I have reviewed the guidebook and noticed CDFIs are listed as eligible to apply. Will I need to collaborate with a 501c3?
I believe that you are eligible. If you shoot me an email, I'm happy to confirm that, but I am relatively certain that CDFIs are eligible for funding. They are a public entity. Obviously 501c3s are kind of the largest category of public entities, but I do know that for example, like 501c6s are eligible as well. So I believe CDFIs are an eligible category of kind of a public entity that can apply for funding. And in fact, actually, now that I think about it, I believe we have funded some CDFIs in the past. I think we funded a project last year with Woodlands Community Lenders. So I'm almost certain that you'd be fine.
All right, thank you for that question. Next, Bureau of Senior Services, can we apply on behalf of our provider network / senior centers for nutrition programs, including equipment replacement?
So one thing that I would just recommend is like for specific projects, it's kind of hard to walk through every single specific account and everything like that. I'd strongly recommend for most folks to take a look at some of the projects that we funded last year and the year before to see if, those projects are, we funded similar projects in the past. For this question specifically, I see no reason why that wouldn't be eligible. But again, you're going to have to look at the specific agency guidelines and go to their website and make sure that there's not something that I'm missing here. But generally, that sounds like an eligible project. And like I said, I'd take a look at our guidebook and some of the past projects to see if there are other projects that we funded in the past that are similar.
Thank you for that question. I did just want to note that the email address for any additional questions for those that we can't get to today is appropriations@manchin.senate.gov. Again, that's appropriations@manchin.senate.gov.
Thanks, Marcus.
No problem. A few more questions here. Have you seen COPS law enforcement tech and equipment used for construction costs?
That's a great question. I may have to get back to you on that. I believe we've funded equipment. Well, I know we funded equipment. I don't think we funded any construction projects in the past. So we probably need to check with the committee to make sure that's an eligible use.
Okay, thank you for the question. Next, we are looking at 2 construction projects with different outcomes. Should we put them in separate applications or one larger application?
That one, whoever asked that might be helpful to just elaborate on kind of what you're thinking there.
Richard, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, we have multiple campuses and we need construction on 2 different campuses. One is highly technical and the other one is more gen ed and distance learning. So clearly different projects, different towns, different outcomes. I don't know if submitting 2 is going to hurt us or how you look at that.
So no, submitting 2 definitely doesn't hurt. What I would recommend is that when you do submit more than one request, please let us know kind of what priority those requests are when you submit it. And that's included on the form, but that's just very helpful to know, which one is kind of your priority request and which one would be, less of a priority for you. Just to, you mentioned campuses. Are you an educational institution?
Yes, we're community and technical college, 2-year community.
So I will just note that construction projects are not eligible under the Department of Education accounts. So if you're going to fund a construction project, that would have to be kind of elsewhere within the appropriations process. I'd take a look at THUD, the Economic Development Initiatives account, because those can fund construction projects, but unfortunately the education projects cannot.
Okay. How about rural development? Will that fund construction for education?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Richard, for
Thank
the
you.
question. Next question is, we are a 501c3 organization. We are considering applying for funding for a fully inclusive multi-generation playground for our community of Morgantown. I don't know what account or subcommittee to apply for funding. Any help or guidance would be appreciated. Thank you.
Oh, and actually, I just want to go back to the last question. I will say that just to clarify, construction is generally not eligible. The only instance that construction would be eligible for kind of Department of Education projects is when kind of a specific amount of construction is needed for a specific technology upgrade. I don't have a good example of that right now, but the construction really has to be kind of ancillary to the technology or equipment upgrade. And then Marcus, what was that question again? I apologize.
No, you're good, Seth. So we are a 501c3 organization and considering applying for funding for a fully inclusive multi-generation playground for our community in Morgantown. I don't know what account or subcommittee to apply for funding. Any help or guidance would be appreciated.
So recreational activities are pretty tough to fund in the appropriations process. They're not eligible for USDA community facilities. The only account off the top of my head that I can think of that could possibly be eligible would be within the HUD Economic Development Initiatives account. But again, as I mentioned before, kind of have to meet one of those CDBG national guidelines, national objectives. Unfortunately, Morgantown might be difficult to meet some of those objectives because one of the key ones for most of the state of West Virginia is benefit to low to moderate income persons. A lot of the state is eligible for that. Basically, you just have to demonstrate that the project area, town, county, census tract is over 50% low to moderate persons. But some parts of Morgantown may, depending on where the project is, some parts of Morgantown may not be eligible for that. And, the other two pieces of that national objectives are, meeting an urgent community need. Usually that means kind of a healthcare, the health component, and removing slums or blight. So if that, I would say that if that recreation facility would be kind of removing some abandoned buildings or removing some slums or blights, that could be potentially eligible as well. But you'll just have to look through the guidance and determine if that project kind of fits some of those objectives. I hope that answers the question.
All right, thank you for the question. Next question, is it generally seen as beneficial for projects requesting congressionally directed spending to be seeking other funding sources simultaneously? Absolutely.
We recommend you to apply for as many federal grants as possible whenever you can. We've had some projects in the past that have gotten federal funding outside of the process and have no longer needed a congressionally directed spending request. And like I said, the congressionally directed spending can take a very long time. From today is March 2023. You may not get funding until fall of 2024. There are some federal programs that are much more quick or much more, I think, more readily available and can provide that funding more quickly. I'm thinking, EDA, ARC, USDA, all of those programs, they're starting to roll out their FY23 funding. So within those funding streams, you may be able to get funding for that more quickly than through a congressionally directed spending request. So strongly recommend, that's all to say, strongly recommend that you apply to other federal grants. Just keep us in the loop if you happen to get those, or if anything happens that would change anything for us, just let us know.
Okay, next question. Our request will be complicated. It's a joint water sewer project to help with economic development on Corridor H. The water will be with the EDA and the sewer will be with the sanitary board, and the match will come from the county commission. Will this affect the project?
No, not at all. I think I don't fully understand the question, I guess, but what would impact the project that you're concerned about?
Should we give each entity the money, or is it okay that we give the money? I mean, I just want to make sure we do it right so that we're, more considered for the project.
When you say we, do you mean like the county?
The county commission, correct. The county commission is going to pay for the match. They wouldn't let, it's our project. We paid to have the feasibility studies done for both projects. And we know how important these projects are, so we're really pushing hard to try to get them completed. And we don't have the funds to do the projects without help. But we have saved the money from that came down from the American Recovery Fund. We saved our money. We didn't spend it. We didn't give it on bonuses and salaries and things like that, because we knew this project was so important that we saved our money in hopes that we could apply for this project. And we didn't get a lot of money. We got like $3 million in Lewis County, but we wanted to make sure that whatever we need to do, that it helps our project. And with this being said, that we can't apply as the county commission, that we have to have each individual organization that handles the process, like the EDA handles the water, and the sanitary board will own the sewer part of it. And we are working with both groups and meeting with both groups, and both have agreed to come on board. I just want to make sure that it's, do we need to give them the funding to pay the match, or does it hurt us for us to do the match?
That's a good question. You're right, this is complicated, because generally speaking, most of our water and wastewater projects, the applicant has to be kind of the water or sanitary sewer board. With this project, given that it's a joint project, I would recommend probably applying together. And if we move down the process and the committee tells us that there's an issue with it and it needs to be broken up, then we can kind of we can cross that road when we come to it. One thing that I'll say just kind of more generally is this is kind of an iterative process. Sometimes we get questions from the committee that we can't answer, so we'll go back to some of the applicants, and sometimes we're told like we need to split this into two different projects, which we can obviously do down the road. And so I think for simplicity's sake for us, I'd recommend applying as one project, and then further down the road, if it looks like we're able to get this through the committee, and if this project might be eligible for funding, we can kind of take those questions as they come.
Okay, thank you. Crystal Mersch indicated she has a question. Crystal, can you please unmute yourself? Crystal, can you please unmute yourself? Okay, we'll move on to a question from Shelby. What happens if a CDS request is approved, but additional funding secured in lead time before the announcement has made the CDS funds no longer needed?
So I think that's kind of that scenario that I just mentioned, where you get a federal grant before the CDS project is approved. I'd recommend that you just kind of let us know, before, like when that happens, and then we can kind of take it as it comes. But I think what would happen is basically we would not include that in the final funding bill. But there's I would just say that that's why it's important for you to just kind of keep in touch with us as this process moves forward.
All right, our next question is, any recommendations on the letters of support? Should they contain any particular information?
So generally speaking, those can kind of include any kind of support from the community. They can include, like I said, they can include intended use plans or feasibility studies. I'd also just say that there are some accounts that require specific letters of support. The EPA accounts, the transportation accounts require specific letters of support, or the Emergency Operations Center and the pre-disaster mitigation through FEMA requires specific letters of support from kind of that relevant state agency. So generally speaking, I would say that there's not really any specific recommendation I have, just to show that you have general support. In the case of those accounts that do require those specific, you do need to have those.
All right, thank you. Crystal is trying to unmute herself. Can you try again, Crystal? Okay, she does have a question. Crystal, if you can hear me, if you don't care to email your question to appropriations@manchin.senate.gov, and Seth or Ben will get back to you on that question. And Seth, that's all the questions we have in the chat. So do you have any closing words?
I don't. I just saw that Agnes, I guess, got kicked off while I was explaining that last question. So I'll just say, Agnes, my recommendation would be to just send it in one request for now. And if we get kind of additional guidance and it looks like this project might get funded through the committee and the committee has any specific questions or anything, we can just kind of take that as it comes. But generally speaking, you know, if you have any questions at all, like Marcus said, please shoot us an email at appropriations.senate.gov. We'll try to get to as many of these questions as possible. Marcus, are we able to send an email to the folks that are on this call afterwards?
Yes, so we have
Okay.
everyone's email that registered for this call, so we can send a blast out to them.
Okay, yeah, and then and so basically to answer one of the questions there from I think Billy Likens, we'll provide the guidebook and some of the past applications or past awards that have been successful, so you can kind of take a look at those and see if anything is helpful in when you're working on your application this year. And are we able to provide the recording, Marcus?
Yeah, we can provide that
Okay.
as well. Yeah.
Okay, then yeah, we can do that. All right, well, thanks, folks. And like I said, if you have any other questions, just let us know. Thank you all.